Hey everybody. Welcome this is, I don't know, week six? Six? I think we've been doing like what we're calling OT Cyber Tuesdays for now, at least. So I appreciate everybody for coming. Hopefully everybody can hear and see me okay. If you can, let me know in the chat just to make sure everything's good. I know we had a couple uh technical issues last week. So new microphone. So hopefully it sounds a million times better. But also want to make sure everything works. So, but yeah. So I appreciate everybody for coming. Like I said, let me know if you can hear me okay and everything looks okay in the chat. But I appreciate everybody for coming. This week is a kind of follow up. Um, we had talked a little bit last week about Gen AI and its role in OT, ICS, cybersecurity. And for those of you that know me, I spend a lot of time using ChatGPT to create different tools for learning OT, or ICS, cybersecurity, or how creating tools to defend our environment, or creating tools to be able to from an offensive security perspective to be able to test our environment. So this is good. This is the last hour to the Kali Linux workshop I did for OT ICS. So thanks, I appreciate that everybody for letting me know. So thanks, Michael. Good to see you. Rudy, thanks for coming. Vitali, appreciate it. So Jack, welcome back. So oh, very cool. Yeah, have a good time at Sands next week. That'll be really exciting. Yeah. Oh, and doing work study. Yeah. So very cool. Yeah. Take advantage of every second of that opportunity that you can. Absolutely. So, but yeah, feel free to reach out. No problem. Gabriel. All my friends over at Jacobs. How's it going? I'm glad you made it. And Casey, thanks. Good. I'm glad. Thanks for confirming. Good. So technical issues out of the way. So about a week and a half ago, I did a 4-hour workshop around using Kali Linux in OT-ICS cybersecurity or in penetration testing, right? Kali Linux is usually associated with IT penetration testing, right? That was the main design and I think the goal behind it and all of its predecessors like Backtrack and Knoppix STD. And so I go way back for those. And so I wanted to put the workshop together almost as like an appendix or almost an introduction to my getting started in penetration testing for OT ICS course. Part 5 is actually on YouTube tomorrow. So I'm really excited about that. And then we'll have a week basically between now and the end of the year. Maybe I'll have to do 2 parts, because I want it all wrapped up by the end of the year, so to have that out there. So, and then, I'm in the middle of redoing the Getting Started in OT-ICS cybersecurity course, so I'm gonna launch that in January, and, like, a part a week, on YouTube, so that'll be there as well. So that's kind of the plan as far as YouTube content for those of you that are interested. I know there's a few folks that definitely follow the channel, so I appreciate that. So thanks, Jack. Again, I appreciate that. So anonymous LinkedIn user, I appreciate that. So um, sorry you missed the class, but yeah, I think we had a great class. I had a lot of fun, especially doing day 2 and added a bunch more labs. I actually have some more. I'm in the middle of putting the finishing touches on. I'll just keep creating labs as as long as I can. So thanks for coming, Blake Rudolph. And then another anonymous LinkedIn user. Sometimes everybody shows up, sometimes not. So maybe there's some privacy settings, which is all good. So let me share out my screen. I have a couple things that I'll probably share out, or will share out. So I do have. I'm just going to share the entire screen, so that'll make it a little bit easy. Looks really weird though in that echo chamber. So again, this is the last part, actually second to last part from my Kali Linux workshop for OT and ICS, and it still doesn't. have to be careful here. Let me actually, I guess I'll reshare those individually since it'll that way we don't have to worry about crazy windows. And it's nice to be able to jump back and forth. And then remember, if you have any questions, just feel free to drop them in the chat. I know. So another anonymous LinkedIn user was asking any new OSINT materials. I actually have updated some of the OSINT materials. I actually have a new video coming out. It's either going to be next week or the week after, and some pretty, I think, beefy updates to the OSINT course. One of the big chunks is around using Zumai. So Zumai is basically like the Chinese version of Shodan. So for those that are familiar with Shodan, Shodan's a great platform, right? And there's a lot of really cool features with it. Zumai is, again, it's the Chinese version of Shodan, and they had a unlimited user account for $150 for the Black Friday sale. So I went ahead and got that. And they actually have some cool features. So when you compare the two, there's definitely some things that Shodan does better. There's things that Zumai does better. They also have different coverage. So we always talk about how they scan the entire world or the entire internet, but it's interesting to see based off of one being based in the U.S. and one being based in China, like how that the differences that are there. And I think that actually makes for a really interesting conversation. So yeah, definitely a lot of new OSINT stuff coming. So I appreciate you for asking. Definitely. So, but again, yeah, if there's any more questions, just drop them in the section. But in this section actually came from the or again, it's kind of like an appendix to the pen test course, because Kali Linux in the IT world, right, is that one platform that all the IT pen testers use pretty much, right? And I know there's Parrot and there's a few others out there. Parrot's the other one that's probably the most actively maintained, besides Kali Linux. So, but there was a really cool feature that I had come across in that you can now integrate Gemini, Google's Gen AI platform, in with the command line, and I just thought that was super cool. And so that was originally why I started just to build the whole workshop in the first place, but just because I really thought that was a super cool feature. But there's also so much more we can learn about Kali Linux and how we can still use it in OT or ICS penetration testing. So the first part of this section is really talking about how we can use ChatGPT to create scripts. I've done quite a few videos around that, but we'll kind of touch on that real lightly, and then we'll look at how you can integrate Gemini with Kali Linux. So you just have to have a Google account, and then you can log in and actually use it to do things like help with testing and help automate your testing. So when we look at it for the purpose of this conversation, when we talk about what is Gen AI, right? Generative uh, artificial intelligence, right? We're content creators with Gen AI, right? That's exactly what Gen AI is, right? We're content creators. Now, a lot of people, right, are familiar with using like ChatGPT or Gemini to spit out a bunch of uh, text, right? Uh, I use it a lot to write code, right? I am not a developer. I stopped pretending to be a developer a long time ago. I don't have the patience to be a developer, right? Because I just if I get an error, I just throw my hands up. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. I just don't have that patience. So, ChatGPT, Gemini, the others, right? They make really not only really good developers, but they also make really great code troubleshooters. So if there is an issue, they're actually really good at fixing the issue. And we'll probably see that in the demonstration later. Is that when, in this case, Gemini gets caught in almost like a loop, like trying to sort out its own code. Is really fascinating because of the integration at the terminal, that you can watch it. like reason and go back and forth in this automated process, which you can't get that in the online version, like if you're using your browser. So really cool. Images, right? I use Midjourney a lot, so I use that in a lot of my content. So and it's really cool. You can actually use Gen AI to create things like event logs if you want to learn. Oh, maybe incident detection and response in the OT world. You can actually have it generate logs for you to simulate an incident, which I find really fascinating, right? Or I've used it to create packet captures of industrial control protocols before. It's not perfect yet, so there's definitely some troubleshooting and some trial and error. But remember, Gen AI is only getting better every day. So super cool. You can do report templates. We talk a little bit about that also in the course. So but remember, Gen AI really, especially, I'm most familiar with ChatGPT and Gemini. I have accounts for both, and I kind of put them up against each other. Just half of the time, I'm just curious to see how they do things differently. But remember, it's really trying to guess what you are looking for. Right? It's trying to anticipate your needs. So that's part in how it generates content, but it also is really interesting. And what we'll see when we're generating scripts is now when let's say you come up with the idea for a tool and you use ChatGPT to create that tool, then it'll come back and it'll now make suggestions. It's like, hey, this is a great tool, right? ChatGPT by default, it's always super nice to you. It's always blowing smoke, as they say. But the idea is it'll come back and say, hey, this is a great tool. What would make it even better is, hey, have you thought about this or this or this or this? If you want me to make any of these changes or additions, just let me know and I'll do it. Really cool. So there's some really cool features that can come because it's like, oh, you know what? I never thought of that, and that would be actually really cool to have. So, of course, Gen AI is only as good as the information that it's trained on. So general platforms like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, right? Course, have just had massive amounts of knowledge that have been poured into them. This is where we get a little bit into trouble, or a lot in trouble, when applying Gen AI to the OT or ICS world, right? Because everybody's talking about that. And there's a huge rush to use things like AI to start to run plants already. And it was like, that I can see in the future, but in 2025, because we don't have any real training data in the OT or ICS world. And so it's really hard when you think about it to just be able to take an AI tool, drop it in, and run a plant automatically. But that's where people are really trying to get to really fast, even though they still can't master things like backing up their systems, right? And testing those backups to make sure that they're good. So we're still missing a lot of the fundamentals before we should even think about getting to AI. But again, it's coming and it's coming super fast. So and of course, Gen AI is never perfect, but a lot of the times, uh, it's pretty darn close. Obviously, when it comes to things like, yes, running a plant, right, operating a plant, right, making decisions when safety and availability come into question, good enough, right, is not good enough, right, especially when it comes to safety. But, right, for the vast majority of time, especially if you're new to OT or ICS and you're learning about things like PLCs and HMIs and how they come together, ChatGPT, Gemini, they're great platforms to help, hey, say, hey, what is this type of asset, right? What does it do? Give me an example. How does this work in a power plant? How does this work in a water treatment facility? How does this work in, XYZ? Any of those questions you're curious about. And is it 100%, right? No. But for those types of questions, it's gonna be 99.5 at least percent, right? So it's more than good enough in that case for learning, right? So So I do use ChatGPT, like I mentioned, and Gemini a lot through the browser when creating tools. I think I've created up to now like 2,000 individual scripts using ChatGPT. This actually started 2 years ago when I was doing my master's kind of project for SANS, and I needed to create a web application, and I needed to understand how to connect to different PLCs and determine the operational mode for each of those. And I realized, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not a developer, so I didn't want to create a, web interface, which is very painful, but I needed to for this project. And so it's like, oh, at the time I was just reading about how attackers were using ChatGPT to create a realistic phishing platform. So I was like, well, if they can use it to create a phishing platform, I can use it to like create a simple web application to tell me if my PLCs are in run mode or not. And I did. And it took about 5 minutes, and and ever since then, right, I've been in love from that perspective because I think a lot of people think of different tools. Like it would be nice to have a tool to do this, or it would have, it'd be nice to have a tool that does that. But at the same time, again, you're like me, definitely not a developer, don't have that patience, or just don't have the time, right, to learn. I love, those of you that know me, I love learning. I love learning new things, but I also, I don't want to spend, I don't 3 years learning how to write code to write a tool, right, to do one little thing, right? So there's just that benefit in the time investment. So, so I do spend a lot of time using ChatGPT and Gemini to write tools, right? And and actually, I see. Let me reshare out. Um, I also have a Kali Linux instance. Um, Let me see if it is easy to share out. We'll see if this works. It should. Get it to wake up. And I am actually on that machine. The only thing that you don't see is that I am, or that you see there, is that's my Gmail account. Nothing sensitive in there other than my lunch order. Um, and so um, I'm logged into that because we need that authentication for the command line or the terminal integration later. So sorry, I'm having to shift. My dog is in my lap. He had surgery yesterday, so he he can't like move around or jump on things. But so definitely, love to use, you see all my spam and Black Friday sales. When we look at using chat GPT, and I love chat GPT for a couple reasons. One is the first tool that I was using, and like I think a lot of people fell in love with it. And I was like, wow, this is really the coolest thing. The other thing is you don't have to be logged into ChatGPT to actually use it. So you can actually use it for free for a good little while, more than like Gemini will go a little bit, but you can only have maybe like 4 or 5 prompts and you're done. ChatGPT will go for a lot longer. Other tools like I think Claude, there is no option without you have to sign in, which I find really interesting or ironic because it's the privacy focused Gen AI platform, but then they make you log in to use it. So uh, kind of funny. So, so we're going to look a little bit at using the the browser, and then we'll actually look at the integration. So and how that works. So appreciate everybody for coming. Ronan, thanks for coming. Taiwo, thanks for coming from Nigeria. A couple friends out there. So glad you were able to make it. So Jared, welcome back. I appreciate it with coffee and do Kalu or Jay. Thanks. Abdurazak. I hope I didn't butcher that. So thanks. How to start OT cybersecurity knowledge from zero That's a great question. I'll real quickly, hold on, let me get you a link, and I'm going to put this link in the chat. And then this link is the one I send out when I have folks ask me that question. And so this will actually take you to a LinkedIn post. This is an updated one that's only from about a week ago that has a list of all my top resources. And if you look through those, it goes from my YouTube channel and my ebooks everything's free, right? So you can go and learn how to get started in OT cybersecurity. So I'm glad that you asked. So, and then Farron asked, how important is Linux skills and Windows skills are in OT and IT? Yeah, so it depends on what's in your environment. So in the IT world, still most of the environments I'm familiar with, they're still primarily Windows, but there's definitely some Linux there, right? So of course, we always talk about from a cybersecurity perspective, right? Whatever you're most familiar and what you can defend better, that's what you want to use. But of course, that's not necessarily up to you. So, you definitely want to learn what you need for your environments. For me, I'm just an old school like Windows person. I've been using Windows for forever. But I learned Linux because that's where a lot of the penetration testing tools were going back. I remember even the original version of Nessus, which was the open source vulnerability scanning tool back in the day. That it's like I was learning Linux to learn, how to use these different types of tools because they didn't run on Windows. So that's how I got interested into Linux. So I'm not a Linux administrator in any stretch of the imagination. So one thing you do have to realize though, in OT environments like power plants, water treatment facilities, rail networks, right? There's Windows machines everywhere. So we have OT or ICS assets like PLCs and HMIs and DCS, and right, this list goes on and on. But there's also a lot of Windows machines and domain controllers and file servers, and we have database servers called data historians, right, which store information about how the environment works. So I would say if you had to choose between the two for the OT world, it's definitely Windows. There is some Linux in OT, absolutely, but the percentage is even much smaller than you would see in the IT world. So, at least from the environments that I've seen. I know Gabriel's on, he's been in a ton of environments working not only now at Jacobs, but man, yeah, so maybe he can chime in as well. But I think in OT, you see much more Windows. Again, there's a little Linux there, for sure. But in the environments that I'm in, it's much smaller than like in the IT world. So, but good question. So, all right. So let's look at um, again generating a tool, right? If I'm in using ChatGPT, again, this is one you can use for free. You don't have to log in, and I can say like, okay, create a uh, script, right? If I can type. Oh, you know what? Let me make that bigger so everybody can see it, right? Create a script. And then if you don't specify what type of script, it's always going to do Python, right? Because I think it's going to have the more options to do what you want through Python. Let's say I can say create a script to connect to a PLC running Modbus, right? So if you're not familiar, PLC is the most commonly used asset we have in OT, right? That it's physically wired into those pieces of equipment in the real world that we're monitoring and controlling. And that Modbus is the most commonly used protocol, industrial protocol in OT or ICS environments, kind of like an open source protocol, if you will, which is why it's so popular. And so I'm going to say, create a script to connect to this most commonly piece of used equipment over the most commonly used protocol we have in OT environment. And then we're going to say, and then allow for the option to enumerate, right, which is just a fancy way of saying listing, right? Allow for the option to enumerate or list the coils and registers in memory. So as we're monitoring an environment, like maybe a power plant, and I'm watching a turbine as it spins, right? I'm watching how fast is it spinning, right? The temperature of the turbine, right? We don't want it to get too hot. We don't want it to spin too fast or too slow, right? We want everything just right? And so all that information is stored in memory. And because Modbus is an unauthenticated protocol, we can connect to it with no username, no password, right? No credentials, right? We can just connect and then we can access, right? That information. You can even change that information. That's where things get dangerous, right? In OT. But you can see we said, hey, create this real simple script. And you can see it says, okay, we're going to create this script. This is what it's going to do. Even tells us, hey, before you can run this, you have to install a Python module called PyModBus. So that gives your Python script the ability to essentially talk Modbus. And then it shows you, okay, here's the script, right, itself. And then we can download that and use that to uh, connect, right, to the PLC and enumerate it. Now, in this case, you can see it even says, "Hey, here's what your tool is going to look like." Right? That's really cool, right? And I can just click here. I can say, "Hey, copy that code." I'm like, "Okay, very cool." Right? And then this is where, as I mentioned earlier, it said, "Hey, by the way, cool tool, right, to start with. But if you want, we can add other features like error handling, right? Modbus RTU support, right? So different type of OT asset for remote environments like substations, right? Pipelines, right? Different have pumping stations, right? That are out in the field that you connect to them over a wide area link, right? Add real time monitoring. So it makes it a much more realistic um, tool that like you're continually pulling data to watch as maybe those values change over time, which in a production environment in the real world, they should be, right? So what we're going to look at is actually have a simulated uh, environment that we can work with. So I mentioned earlier, I have way too many scripts that I create, and then so I'm just going to run this one in the um, background. So it's going to simulate a PLC. Right. And so the simulated PLC is what we're going to use to connect to. So, and I know you're not going to see this for a second, but let me get it all set up because we'll even test out that script we just created because I'm curious. So I'm just going to call it test script because I'm very imaginative with my names. I'm just saving this out right now. So we can, oops, I have to go back and let me copy out that code. Okay, and save that. All right, all right. Then we'll open up a command window. So I'm going to share out this command window. Let me share this out. And then we'll check on questions real quick. So the idea, there you go, I'll share. All right, so hopefully everybody sees that. And hopefully that's large enough. I try to keep that font big enough so everybody can see it. So I have, again, ton of scripts. In this one, we called it, I think, test test script, right? And we're just going to run it by default without any parameters. And oh wow, that's the last thing we wanted to see, right? Because it's actually already say giving us an error message, right? So we'll try troubleshooting this real quick. I don't want to spend the time troubleshooting, just with um, the tool, unfortunately. What in fact, actually, let's do this. I have a oops, that's right. It's Windows. Sorry. So I do have a tool um, called the Swiss Army knife. And what you'll see is we can specify the IP address of the virtual PLC. So that's at 10.2.1.226. Okay. And you can see it says, hey, we've connected to the Modbus service. So we know there's something running not only on 502, the port's open, but hey, we connected and tested and made sure this really is Modbus that we're talking to. And then you can see we have a bunch of options, right? So we have the ability to say, oh, read coils. So when we store data in memory and PLCs, we store them in coils, which is binary data, zeros and ones. And then we have registers, which is anything from 0 to 65,535. So I can just say, read coils, 0, show me the um, a couple of coils. In this case, I tell it only show me one. There's an error in it, and it shows you more than you ask it for. That's okay. I'm not going to worry about troubleshooting that. It still works, right? And you can see all the coils on the PLC that are all set to zeros, right? We can do things like, okay, read the first 10 registers, and you can see, oh, there's some zeros, but then I see, oh, a 72 and a 75, and it's like, what's that? Remember, we're doing all this without credentials. We're not asked for a username or a password. I can even go ahead and change, right? I can write one of those registers. I can change that 72 to, oh, that case to 10, right? And then you can reread it just to say, hey, did that actually take? Yeah, it did. Right. Basically, this is a command line version of Frosty Goop, which is a piece of malware that the Russians used to turn off the heating in 600 apartment buildings in Ukraine in the middle of winter. And so this is a really simple tool that it took, 5 minutes to build out with ChatGPT. And as you go through, right, you can create tools. And one thing to do is you have it add one feature at a time, like add a feature, test it, make sure it works, and then add a feature. You can say, hey, do these 10 things at one time, and maybe it'll work, but probably it'll get some of those right, some of them wrong, and it's really hard to fix the things that it gets wrong when you're doing it that way. If you add features one at a time, it's much easier to get it fixed, and you can get a fully functional tool like this in like 10 or 15 minutes. So just things to think about. Yeah, I didn't want to spend a lot of time there and just conscious of time. Um, but that is when we're using the browser, right, to create different types of tools, right? Let me go ahead and bring up the slides again. And if anybody wants these, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, and I can get you a copy, or I can send you to the a link to the download location that has all the slides from the Kali Linux workshop, and it's got the recordings and everything there as well. So just ping me. So let me check questions real quick. Um, so, oops, skipped over one. So, Mura, thanks for coming. Steve, thanks for coming. So let's see, would this work with secure Modbus? No, so industrial protocols are starting to evolve, and they are starting to add authentication and encryption. So when we're talking about this, is just for um, old school Modbus if you want. Now, are there I would say newer implementations, right? More secure versions of industrial protocols, even like MQTT, OPC UA. We think they're just starting to build security in. So they're considered secure. They're definitely more secure than the other protocols, right? Because there's no security. But there are definitely issues, right, with those protocols too that could potentially be exploited, right? I think there's a lot more work to do there, so don't assume assume that they're 100% secure. But yeah, so in this case, we're just talking about normal Modbus though. Yeah. Uh, so would this also cover the attack vector of Modbus direct attack since it leverages the disadvantages? Yeah, exactly. Can you could see real quickly where we could connect to that virtual PLC. We could read what was in memory and we could make changes. Now we didn't get into what those changes are doing, right? So what the impact is to the process, right? What's going on in the real world when I make those changes? Like in that case, it just turned an air conditioner off. Okay, we might think whoop-de-doo, that's not a big deal. But what was that impact was to create an explosion or shut down the plant to the point where yeah, it would be down for 10 days or turn off the heating in these 600 apartment buildings in Ukraine in the middle of winter. But yeah, that would be considered like a Modbus direct attack. So Shane mentioned he's out running, so I appreciate Shane taking us on the run. I'm not a runner, I'm a walker, but it's all good. So where can you get a virtual PLC? So if you ping me on LinkedIn, I can actually send you the links to the one I used here, or you can create your own with ChatGPT. Just say, hey, create a virtual PLC. And you can say, you can give it like a type of environment, like in a power plant, right? And make it realistic. And it will actually turn around a pretty good simulation. Now, sometimes it's, if you're really new to these types of environments, it's going to be hard to tell like when it's done a good job and when it's done a not so good job. So, but definitely, so that's an option. You can have a create one, or definitely ping me on LinkedIn, and I can send you some links. Or also, another one that folks might want to check out is LabShock. And then there's also GRFICS version 3. These are two virtualized environments that come with virtual PLCs and all the other types of systems that you would come across in OT. So definitely. So um let's see. Teresa's asking, would be interesting on how to detect this attack pattern simply just by sending traffic to passive detection only. Yeah, and it's really going to go to anomaly detection, right? Because if you're watching your environment over time, right, the nice thing in OT environments is that the communication is very predictive, right? It's very static. And so you're only seeing limited commands from, specific host to specific host, like from an HMI to a PLC. And so all of a sudden, if you see some other IP address, right, or even a legitimate host on the network issuing all of a sudden these sudden commands that would, indicate like this kind of Modbus attack that we were launching earlier. If you're watching the network passively and have a tool in place to be able to detect any anomalous behavior, then it should be throwing up red flags for sure and be able to catch those. So, yeah. All right. So let's try oh, I forgot one thing. Let me reset that virtual PLC because I did change that one value. So, okay, I'm going to restart the virtual PLC behind the scenes. If you want to know what it kind of looks like, let me share out that screen real quick because what it does is it actually simulates essentially a thermostat, but this could actually be for an AC unit, like for your house or apartment or an office building. Or I have some clients that have air conditioners the size of a house, right? And they use it for these massive warehouses or think massive data centers, right? And so it doesn't matter how big or small, though, they're controlled the same way. This is when we start looking at how we control equipment in the real world through OT or ICS. It really doesn't matter how big or how small, right? It's the basics are all the same. So that's why I really like this example. So it's really simulating this thermostat. And the idea in this one lab was are you able to, be able to get to a point where you can completely stop, right, turn off the air conditioner unit. Right? And so the thought process that you follow actually is the same that you would follow when you're attacking a power plant, right? Or a water treatment facility, or I think you get the idea. So you can use, yes, the switch screens again. You can use the web version of ChatGPT or Gemini or the others to do things like create tools. Right. We also talked about if you're worried about privacy, right, you can install the Tor browser on Kali Linux and connect over and through the darknet, right? So you're jumping through multiple relays and then coming out somewhere in the world before accessing the site. Right? Um, so we can access those sites and they don't seem to be bothered by you coming from Tor. So it's creating not only your own scripts using those tools. Again, if you want the slides, I can actually send these to you. You can see one of the examples we did in class was just create a simple port scanner, right? To scan for the five most common IT ports and the five most common OT ports. And then you get a tool, right? This is ChatGPT, but here's the tool that we run in Kali Linux, and you can see the scan results, right? So it's not as cool as Nmap, right? But it works, right? And then you can even do something like, oh, let's convert that to PowerShell so I can run it on Windows machines. Because like we were talking about earlier, there's tons of Windows machines everywhere in OT. And we see attackers get into the environments, right? They're moving from Windows machine in IT to Windows machine in the IT OT DMZ to Windows machine in OT. And so Mandiant talks about the 99% rule, meaning the vast majority of the time, right? Incidents in OT, it's on Windows machines, right? It's not having to do with the actual OT assets like PLCs and HMIs. Right? And so here's the PowerShell version, right, of that tool. And then there's another example where we can take research from a security company like Dragos, right? And they're the ones that had discovered and reported on Frosty Goop, right? The Modbus utility that the Russians had written to turn off heating, right, in these 600 apartment buildings in Ukraine. I think it just took the building management team 2 days to figure out how to actually fix the issue. This is a really easy piece of malware. It was a really easy attack, right? So I talk a lot about Frosty Goop because of those two things, right? Because we shouldn't make it so easy for attackers to be able to do what they do in OT environments these days. So so before we jump into the Gemini integration, let me check for any other questions. So um, Bian asks, will this kind of attack occur through the IT environment? Potentially, right? If you have to think though, like if you're going to connect to a PLC, you have to have that path. Some IT environments, they don't have a firewall between IT and OT. Some very large environments still today with like 100 plants around the world still don't have firewalls between IT and OT. And I'm amazed that they don't have more issues than they do. That's always surprising. But yeah, so if you have a path to get to that PLC, whether that's from the IT network because there's no firewall, or maybe that firewall does exist, but it's not configured correctly, it's possible. Maybe that PLC is connected to the internet, right? That's probably what we'll actually look at next week, right? How do we find these resources or these PLCs and HMIs that are still connected to the internet? So yeah. So Jared asked, would it be possible to use virtual PLCs to make a practice environment of a plant to test things in? Yes, yeah, definitely. So you can look at like LabShock, GRF, ICS, right, where they've already created those virtual environments for you. If you really want to get into it, Jared, I'm trying to remember. I think you might come from an OT background. Um, and so especially folks like PLC techs, or other folks in automation, a lot of times what you'll see is they use Open PLC as a virtual PLC, and then there's a platform called Factory IO, and so you can simulate pretty much any type of factory environment you can think of, and you can have it controlled through virtual P through Open PLC. So that's definitely something to check out for sure. But if you, it's a lot of work, right? Especially for folks that are brand new and haven't done like PLC programming and any type of automation work. But that would be something to look at. If you haven't done, that type of work before, check out LabShock, check out GRF ICS version 3. Yeah, the older versions are, they require like 50 million VMs to to run in, and it just makes it impossible. So, are PLCs communicating on serial links considered intrinsically safer than running Ethernet? Yes, I would say normally people would consider them safer, right? Because you're taking TCP/IP out of the equation, right? Usually when you say take Ethernet out of the equation, because right, the reason Ethernet is there is to run TCP/IP. And of course, since TCP/IP is also the routable protocol we use on the internet and every other network on the face of the planet, that's where the vast, amount of dangers come from. Now, if you're going to serial, there's still issues there for sure, but you've reduced the the vast majority of them by removing Ethernet and TCP/IP. So, oh, Teresa shared out the one of the links for OpenPLC. Very cool. Thanks for doing that. So, so, um, and then Jared says, "Oh, yes." So he works in wastewater plant. So I think we had touched base on LinkedIn. Yeah, I can remember. So very cool. Yeah, so might be a good fit. So if you check those out, let me know how that goes for sure. So, all right. So on the slides, you can see that there's actually now a utility for Kali Linux, right? Called Gemini-CLI, right? Command line, so that way, when you install it, and you install it like any package or application on Kali Linux, so you do sudo, which gives you administrative access, root level access, right? And then say apt install, and then the name of the package. So you install it first. You say super easy, takes like a couple of seconds, and then you can test it to see. So you can do -h, right? And then you can start to see, it can get very complicated very quickly. So, especially if, you wanna run a query, a prompt at a time or, integration with the MCP, like, that's where I'm like, "Oh, I'm just even starting to learn, like, a bunch of that stuff." But if you run the command just by itself, this is where you can see it comes up with the kinda like the little Gemini screen, and then it gives you 3 options to authenticate. So the idea is they wanna make sure you have a Google account before allowing you to, uh, finish the integration, right? So this is where I always go to just I log in with Google, so that's why I had logged in with my personal email. And so that way, when I go to the command line now, right, we should be able to just authenticate right away, right? And so let me go back to that Kali Linux instance. Let me go ahead and reshare that. Just always takes me a second to switch over. Oh, all right, hold on. Let me stop sharing for a second. It's always something right here. Okay, I'm gonna share out. Now you see the PLC running in the background, right? All right, and then let me switch over. Oh, it's so weird. Let me make sure. Okay, let me stop sharing. It's not seeing. That's very weird. Okay. VMware is still running. It was just it wasn't seeing it in the list. So let me, all right, now let me try to reshare. Go to window. Oh, yeah, there it's right there now. Interesting. Anyways, okay. So we're back to Kali Linux. Let me you can see I'm logged into my personal Gmail account there. I'm going to open up the terminal and then I'm just going to type in Gemini dot CLI. I think this was one thing we noticed when we were doing the workshop. Yeah, it did say it's like you would think it would be a little, maybe a little faster. Oh, okay. So it also, you could see it already realized that I logged in previously. Again, if you hadn't logged in previously and this is the first time you do it, then you just press 1 and then it'll actually pull up the browser and it'll actually have you log into Gmail if you want to do that. You can also supply an API key, but I just do the Gmail login. So, all right. And here is now our new terminal prompt for Kali Linux, but it's tied in with Gemini. So where this gets interesting is I can say something like, okay, scan the 10.2.1.0 subnet for the presence of Modbus. Right? And so even if I don't necessarily know, right, what port Modbus runs on, right, TCP 502, but if I didn't know that, it'll actually figure that out for me. And then it says, hey, do you want to allow Nmap to run? So, in fact, yes. And I'm going to say not one because that's only going to allow it once. I'm going to say, okay, just always allow it. So now you can see, right? It figured out based off of what I wanted it to do, what it needed to do, right? So it's going to say, oh, to find Modbus, I need to run an Nmap scan, and I need to run an Nmap scan for port 502 across this entire subnet, right? So it came up with the Nmap syntax, and then it's running it. Now it does take a second, and you can see I don't like the fact that it also added. I don't know if you can see it right here, if I really highlight it, but you can see it says Nmap-P 502. So it's looking for any open instances of TCP 502, which is the default Modbus port. And then it says -S capital V, which is for an Nmap service scan. So what Nmap will do is if it finds an open port, then it will actually go ahead, right, and do additional tests to figure out, hey, is Modbus really running on this IP address, right, where it found it? I was hoping it would be done by now. In fact, actually, what we'll do is we'll just cancel that one because we can say scan 10.2.1.226 for the presence of Modbus. That'll make it go a little bit faster. And then earlier, since we said, hey, just run Nmap whenever you want, you can see it's now going ahead running Nmap. Now remember, one way you can kind of keep an eye on behind the scenes of what's actually going on, because I'm like, is it actually doing anything? Because it doesn't really show us, right? What we can do is we can actually run Wireshark, right, to watch to see what's actually going on. And so I'm just going to turn on Wireshark in the background. I do this a lot, and it's come in handy when you're doing these different types of activities to actually figure out like what's going on. I think ETH0 should actually show us. Then we can actually do something like, or actually we can just put Modbus, just show us Modbus traffic. So we're not seeing any traffic. Doesn't even look like it had actually started to scan. We can check for 10.2.1.226. Okay, so here you can see a bunch of port scans, right, to TCP 502, right? So you can see this the three-way handshakes, right, that it's trying to establish to see if there's something there. So that's always good. Oh, that's yeah, because this is all just happening over TCP, right? Traffic, the SYN, the SYNAC, and the ACK, the three-way handshake. It hasn't actually communicated over Modbus yet, which is why the filter um, hasn't worked. So, oh, it's so slow. I don't know. It was much faster when we did this in class. So what you can do, and just using our imagination, because I know we're running short on time, is it eventually will find the Modbus instance. So, and then we can then say, okay, so um, now that you have this Modbus instance, right? I can say enumerate all coils and registers on the PLC running Modbus at 10.1.2.226. Next time I do this, we just start with the terminal. Oh, see, now it's finally catching up and saying, oh, hold on. Oh, I did the wrong. I did the wrong IP address. That's my fault. Let me see where. Oh, I can't copy the other one apparently. Okay. Enumerate all coil. I can't spell either. And registers on the PLC running Modbus at 10.2.1.226. Because there you can see it did run the Nmap scan, and since there was nothing, it didn't find the port, it returned it really fast. All right. I don't know why it's working so fast now. So you can see, right here, it actually ran Nmap and actually ran one of there's a script, a single Nmap script for enumerating Modbus in there. So you can actually see if you try to further enumerate the PLC, it reports itself as a Rockwell PLC. And you can even see the make and the firmware version. So you can put that in there. And then this is where it starts to get into some loops where it's trying to figure out, okay, what's the next best step to take? It's like, okay, I ran Nmap, right? And I found out, yes, it's a PLC. And yes, Modbus is running on this machine. So now is trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to find a tool that can enumerate coils and registers? Because it understands what coils and registers are. It's how we store information in memory. And now you can see it realizes, okay, what I can do is I can write a Python script to do this. And so it's actually now going through this process of creating a virtual Python environment to run your script in. So that way it's kind of like a mini sandbox for just that script. So it's like, okay, great. Now you can see it also realizes, oh, there's this module for Python called PyModBus that I can use to interact with Modbus. And it's actually also loading some additional modules to do things like add color to text of your tool. That's Colorama. That's as much as I think that's what everybody uses that for. So, and so you can see it's actually trying to, so it actually got a tool that exists called Modbus CLI. So it used that to enumerate. And then now you can see it's going through the help right on the actual tool to see right if it can use that to pull the statistics. And it looks like it actually pulled some of the value. Oops. Whoa, what happened? There we go. It actually pulled a couple of values. which is interesting. So it's funny because this is a completely different route that it took than when we did the class. If you go back and watch the class recording, what it actually did was what I would do is that I would write a custom script to enumerate the coils and registers. And it was funny because it would actually do just like it actually got error messages just like I would get using the web interface. And so it sat there and was going back and forth with itself trying to figure out how to fix the issue. And then eventually it actually got to fix the issue and ran the script and was able to enumerate all of the coils and registers. So so you can see now it says, "Hey, I can read registers right now, but I'm not reading coils. So I need to figure out what's going on here." Right? And says, "Oh, now I'm reading coils, right? I've confirmed coil 20 is 0. Now I'll write a 1 to it using a one-liner Python." I didn't ask anything about writing values. So now it's like, "Hey, wait a minute, you're getting carried away." So this is definitely an interesting path that it took. So anyways, so I gotta do an entire session, right, on that, and I know it's a little hard to follow, right, if you've never, played with, using different scripting tools to be able to, you do things like connect to PLCs and read Modbus. But I am one of those people, I can sit here and just watch it all day long. I find it absolutely fascinating how it thinks through the process. And then again, you could stop this process and start a brand new one, and it'll take a completely different path on to get there. And you can say it finally finished and said, "Hey, I've successfully written the value 1 to coil 20 on the PLC," which is not what we asked, right? We just said, "Hey, enumerate the coils and registers." Because if you start changing values in production, that's where you have safety issues, or you could cause a system to fail. You could cause the process to fail, right? And piece of equipment shuts down, right? And all of a sudden your plant is down, right? So I can say, it's like, "Hey, actually, I just asked you to enumerate all coils and registers and let me know what they are." One moment, optimizing humor. And it'll go through and it'll pull the coils and registers. But that is really concerning, right? And that's a great example of why you would never use something like GenAI right now in automating testing in OT environments, right? And this is where you can see it starts finding error messages, and then so it has to fix the errors, and it'll sit and it'll go back and forth for a little while to do that. So, all right, let me jump back, and I know we're up against time, but if there's any questions, I got some a little bit time to hang out, so I appreciate we can let that sit and uh, and run. So, but um, let's see. Abby was asking, is this a VM and where can we get this lab? Yeah, if you ping me on LinkedIn, I can get you the lab. It's one of my posts on LinkedIn, but I can definitely send it to you. I can send you the slides and workshop materials from the Kali Linux workshop as well. But yeah, definitely, like Dimitri specifies, we don't want to do this in production, especially even scanning alone. We don't want to do in production because it could cause issues. In this case, we told it just to scan, but then it actually started making changes, which is not what we asked it to, which is what we asked it to do. So yeah, like Teresa says, and we are actually already starting to see, some OT related, IT generated attacks for sure. And there's just only more coming. Yeah. And definitely something to see in IT as well. So all right. Well, thanks everybody. Hopefully that started to give you an idea. Again, it's a little that was, I think, a really interesting example because when we did the workshop, we said, "Hey, tell us what the coils and registers are," and it went through the process and eventually said, "Hey, this is what the coils and registers are." Great, that's what we asked for. In this case, we asked it to just list the coils and register, right? Read from memory, but in this case, we actually saw it also make changes to values and memories, and that's where you're gonna get somebody hurt, you're gonna get somebody killed, or you're going to bring down the plant. So definitely a great example though to see. I know it's if you haven't seen this before, it's definitely a little hard to follow though. So just I would try, yeah, yeah, if you make it to B-Sides ICS, definitely, that would be cool. Let me know. Yeah, and that's I mean, the great thing is, so we have B-Sides ICS on February 23rd. It's the Monday, it's the day before S4. S4 runs Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. S4 is considered, it's kind of like the DEF CON or Black Hat of the OT ICS world. But we have B-Sides ICS the day before. So, like B-Sides ICS or S4 tickets, like $2,100. The B-Sides ICS tickets I think are $40, but you get a lot of the big names from S4 come to B-Sides ICS. We have a lot of people that are brand new to ICS and like everybody in between, right? Engineers, operators, owners, it's just a great time, and we're expecting I think four up to 400 people this year. We got a really cool sky bar for the after party overlooking downtown Miami. I'm really excited. Check out, yeah, besides ICS .org. So check that out. Yeah, it'd be cool to have you there, Jared, for sure. So uh Sierra, and thanks for coming. Yeah, I appreciate it. Definitely. So all right. Thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate it. I think next week we're going to talk about more OSIN and OT. And so we'll talk about Shodan. I mentioned Zumai earlier, which is like the Chinese version, because I find it interesting how, you know, two different implementations on two sides of the planet, even though like the internet is the internet, how they see things differently. So we'll see everybody hopefully next week, and have a good one. All right, take care. I appreciate it.